Alrighty then. I'm going to try to make a video covering the basic MBTI stuff for some of our newer subscribers or people who don't understand how the system works very well. So I'm going to try to just jump right into it. Hopefully it's not too garbled and somewhat organized, because I do everything spontaneously. I didn't plan this at all. So coming into this, you should at least know that there are 16 types and that you are one of those types, and each type is notated with 4 letters. The first letter is either an E or an I, signifying that you are an introvert or an extrovert. What that means is your first function is either going to be an introverted function or an extroverted function, and if you have an E as your first letter, then your first function is going to be extroverted, and that's really what makes you an extrovert. And likewise with introverts. The second letter is going to be an N or an S, meaning you're either an intuitive or a sensor. Generally what that seems to play out as, right, is if you're an intuitive, you're much more comfortable working with symbols and representations of things, and you spent a lot of time thinking about such abstract topics, right? Things that pertain to reality in some tangential way, but don't have any direct bearing on it. Sensors will be a lot more concrete about things. They'll be much more focused on the actual things that are going on in the real world around them. Oftentimes, the sensors are thought to be stupid because they're not thinking in abstract ways, but that's certainly not the case. I've met some incredibly intelligent sensors. My dad, for example, who's an ESTJ, he's fucking brilliant. But when I try to talk to him about some of the things that I'm interested in, like psychology and stuff, his eyes just glaze over. He doesn't care, right? He's good at things like engineering. He's good at actually manipulating the world around him to become more efficient, right? And that's the thing, is that sensors are way more likely to actually do shit because it's more important to them. And they're way more likely to be paying attention to stuff that is actually important to pay attention to. Intuitives have a little bit of a, I guess there's a little bit of a roll in the dice nature to their personalities, where like whatever they're thinking about could be total whacked out bullshit and have no connection to reality whatsoever. Or it could be like super penetrating and insightful and the sort of thing that only an intuitive might notice once in a blue moon. But anyway, the third letter is going to be an F or a T, meaning you're either a feeler or a thinker. I don't really like those words. Socionics uses ethics and logic as opposed to feeling and thinking, which I think is a little closer to the mark. But it's not that feelers aren't capable of thinking or aren't capable of logic. They just, basically they lean on other tools first in order to solve their problems. Because, as we all know, there's some problems that either can't easily be solved with logic or can't be solved with logic at all. Things like introverted thinking are often a little bit overblown to signify that someone is way smarter than everyone else, but being good at introverted thinking doesn't actually make you necessarily all that capable of solving all the problems that arise in life. Usually you get ahead by, manipulating people's emotions, for example, which isn't always a logical process, although you could do it logically. There are other much quicker, more intuitive ways of, and when I say intuitive, I don't mean in the MBTI sense, I mean in the colloquial sense, much quicker, more efficient, natural ways of, accomplishing your goals with people and in the world around you. Your fourth letter is going to be a P or a J, meaning you're either a judger or a perceiver. And I don't really like the way it's notated exactly, but basically in MBTI, if you have a P as your fourth letter, it means you're going to have either extroverted intuition or extroverted sensing in your top two functions. And that's what makes you a quote-unquote perceiver, because rather you're, say, for example, an ENTP or an INTP, you're still going to be displaying a lot of extroverted intuition to other people. And so to them, you're going to look a little bit more, scattered and disorganized and herky-jerky and such things, but it's not necessarily a super accurate way of explaining people, because extroverted intuition is, after all, for me as an INTP, it's my second function. My first function is introverted thinking, which it really makes me more of a judger than a perceiver, meaning I often tend to make judgments, right, and then, right, search for whether I'm wrong or not. Like, I make judgments before I do anything else. So, they call me a perceiver. I look like a perceiver. It works kind of easily because that way ENTP and INTP can be notated very similarly, and it's a quick way to tell that they use the same functions, right? They're just in a slightly different order. On that note, actually, I guess I should cover judgers, right? If you're a judger, that means you have, right, an introverted perceiving function in your top two, and correspondingly an extroverted judging function to pair up with it, because every type is only going to have two extroverted functions and two introverted functions in order to balance out your psyche. Otherwise, you really would not function well as a person, like theoretically at least. I'm sure other people have stumbled across other theories, especially like the older Jungian stuff, where you can have like 2 or 3 introverted functions in a row in your stack and all that crap, but that's not how we do it here, at least. And so, right, anytime you have an extroverted function in your top two, you're going to need an introverted one to pair up with it. And if you have a perceiving function like intuition or sensing, then you're going to need a judging function like thinking or feeling to go along with that. And so, if you're a perceiver, for example, and have extroverted sensing or extroverted intuition, then your other top two function is necessarily going to be introverted thinking or introverted feeling, because the other function has to be introverted and it has to be a judging function. So, perceivers have an extroverted perceiving function. Eric calls those doing functions, and an introverted judging function in their top two. Eric calls those deliberating functions. That's what perceivers have. Judgers will have an introverted sensing function, like an introverted perceiving function, like introverted sensing or introverted intuition, right? And then it'll be paired correspondingly with extraverted thinking or extraverted feeling. Now, going back to my example of ENTP and INTP, right? They both use the same functions, right? They both have NE, extroverted intuition, and TI, introverted thinking, in their top two slots. And then they have SI and FE in their bottom two slots. Because they share all the same functions, that means they're in the same quadra. Let's see here. Basically, there's four pairs of functions right? You have a pair such as TI and FE, Introverted Thinking and Extroverted Feeling. If you have one of them in your stack, then you have to have the other one basically mirrored on the other side of your 4-function stack. So because I have TI first, I have FE fourth. And the other pair is Extroverted Thinking and Introverted Feeling, TE and FI. If you have one, you got to have the other, because otherwise your decision-making process is all messed up. You can't make decisions with 2 feeling functions or 2 thinking functions. And they can't both be introverted and they can't both be extroverted. So you have your 4 pairs. You have Extraverted Intuition, Introverted Sensing, Extraverted Sensing and Introverted Intuition, Extroverted Thinking and Introverted Feeling, and Extroverted Feeling and Introverted Thinking. And that means that there are basically 4 different combinations of those 4 pairs of functions. And those 4 different combinations are called quadras. So if you have like the FE and the TI pair and also the NE and the SI pair, then that makes you alpha quadra, like Eric and I. ENTP, INTP, ESFJ, ISFJ. Beta quadra is the same judging functions, right? FE and TI, but different sensing functions, right? They use NI and SE. Then gamma quadra, I guess beta quadra, I'll tell you, that's ESTP, ISTP, ENFJ, INFJ. Then gamma quadra has new judging functions, TE and FI, and they also have NI and SE. So that's going to be INTJ, ENTJ, ISFP, ESFP. And then your delta quadra has TE, FI, and then NE and SI, the same perceiving functions as alpha quadra. And that's going to be INFP, ENFP, ISTJ, ESTJ. So if you have, say, well, I guess I kind of covered all the basics here. Yeah, I guess I'll go over the functions a little bit. So as an INTP, I have introverted thinking. Introverted thinking is a function that basically determines whether or not things are logically consistent. So it's going to check for internal consistency, right, within a system or a theory or anything, really. It's easily going to pick out things like, well, you said this other thing before and now you're contradicting yourself, right? It picks out, it troubleshoots, it picks out where all the errors are, where all the inconsistencies are. And because it tends to do that, you tend to think about things a lot. Right? You're always checking for inconsistencies in everything around you, which is why TI users tend to end up looking really smart, because they actually spend the time and the energy sitting there thinking, and it uses a lot of energy, make no mistake, and they kind of come to conclusions about everything. Those conclusions might be wrong, especially if they never test them against reality, but they'll at least get to the bottom of things in one way or another. Extraverted intuition is a function that it gives you a lot of like clever, quick, witty characteristics, because it makes it really easy for you to riff off of things that other people have said or things that you see around you and come up with alternatives or new ideas based on it. It's really good for telling jokes and coming up with rhymes and poems and all kinds of creative things, I guess, like music and art. It's a very creative function, a very spontaneous function. Up in the top 2 slots, it can be used in more subtle and advanced ways, I guess, that are maybe hard for me to explain, but it kind of it's used much more actively as a method of problem solving in your daily activities, I suppose. By kind of projecting all the possibilities of how things are going to play out kind of ahead in front of you, and you kind of navigate them. Introverted Sensing. This is a function that's often misunderstood. It's not really memories, and it's not really super grounded in all of your senses all the time, exactly. It's kind of like, Eric calls NI and SI, epistemology functions, where it's basically where you archive, the totality of your knowledge that you've, used your other functions to kind of collect information and parse through it and make judgments on it, and then it gets stored in your epistemology function. So SI is really kind of a database of, facts, information, sensory impressions, like it's not something that you'll actually smell or actually feel. It'll be tied to your memory in interesting ways. Like, it's sort of like, if you walked through a field of lemongrass or something as a child, and then 30 years later you're walking in a store and you smell lemongrass, and then you get this hyper realistic impression like, whoa, me when I'm 4 years old, and then it kind of dissipates. It gives you like these really strong ties to familiar things, and it allows you to easily build, routines and processes and little sub-narratives that kind of manage daily life around you. It allows you to pay attention to like really, really subtle little vibrations around you and stuff. Like, we were at a restaurant, and some waitress who I immediately knew was like an ISFJ because of this, Introverted Sensing Dom. She heard my fiance squeezing her ketchup bottle and noticed that it sounded empty and brought her another one. And that's what Introverted Sensing allows you to pay attention to, like really, really, really fine details like that. Fine sensory details. It makes them really technical in a lot of ways. But anyway, I guess I've said all I can about that for now. Then I'm going on to Extraverted Feeling. Extraverted Feeling is, to put really simply, it's the function that you use to win friends and influence people. It makes you aware of other people's momentary feelings and perceptions. It allows you to manage those perceptions easily if you have it in the top 2 functions, perhaps. And it makes you really, kind of conscious and worried about what other people are thinking. Honestly, if people tell you need to stop worrying about what other people think, you're probably someone who has extroverted feeling high in the stack, and you literally can't help yourself but focus most of your conscious attention on what other people are thinking and how other people feel about things, because without doing that, you have no good way of making decisions. And that's fine, because you're really good at it. I should turn around. I'm at the Circle K. Okay. All right. I'm just going to move on to the other 4, which would be my, back stack or unconscious stack, as Eric would put it. And your back stack, things get a little fishy, sort of. Like, you're gonna have functions 4, 5, 6, or no, you're gonna have 5, 6, 7, and 8, as you know, Eric and I will refer to them, and we'll say, you know, 5th slot, which means for me as an INTP, that will be TE, because basically 1 and 5, right? 2 and 6, 3 and 7, 4 and 8 are just going to be mirrors of each other. So if you lead with introverted thinking like I do, then your 5th slot is going to be extroverted thinking. And it's going to go down again. Extroverted thinking, introverted intuition, extraverted sensing, introverted feeling. Just the opposites of what mine are. Yeah, I was trying to cover these slots for you, Jim. My Uncle Jim gave me the idea for this video, by the way. I'll finish explaining the functions. Extroverted thinking is the process and goal-oriented function. It's not going to focus so much on little inconsistencies that don't make sense, because it's really focused on what do I have to do to make this work right. It's more, right, externally focused. It's not looking for internal inconsistencies. It's looking for external results. And so it's going to be the function that you use to efficiently just get from A to B to C. It's going to be really good at logistically figuring out, like, you know, how many tons of stone do I need? And where do I have to deliver it? And how fast can I deliver it there? And how cheaply can I do it? And all those sorts of things. It's going to look at any sort of, right, external dynamic system and figure out, right, how it works and how to best use it. Sometimes TE won't even figure out how something works because it doesn't matter. Like, for example, if you're using a jackhammer, right, you don't actually have to know how the jackhammer is constructed and how it works, right, and how the electricity is converted into kinetic energy and so on and so forth, right? But you will know exactly how to use the jackhammer, right, when it should be used, where it should be used, you know, how it should be used safely and properly and all that kind of stuff. You know, you're going to tend to view most things in life through, you know, as either like I said, a goal to be accomplished, or a problem to be solved, or a problem to be fixed. And you're going to be very good at figuring out how to do that. Introverted intuition, just like introverted sensing, it's often misunderstood because it's hard to understand, frankly. Like introverted sensing, it's an epistemology function, meaning it's sort of your stored database, your, you know, the totality of your knowledge. Although introverted intuition is not made up of a bunch of individual experiences and impressions and little discrete bits of data that, you know, have been stitched together and filed away like SI does, right? And I works in like globalized singular truths, right? With extroverted sensing, which is the next function I have to discuss, you have to go out and have a bunch of experiences. And as you have a bunch of experiences in life, they sort of like filter and dribble down into this unconscious thing that gives you a general idea of how stuff is. However, you're not ever going to remember like specific examples or details of things. Like, for example, when we talk to someone who has polar SI and tool function NI, right, they're going to know, for example, that like, oh, I fight with my wife, and I'll be like, well, why do you fight with your wife? And they'll know why in general, right? They'll know what the general problem is that they have with their wife and that their wife has with them. But if you want a specific experience of that happening, right? Can you give me like a specific conversation that happened regarding this like 1 week ago? They won't be able to do it because they don't actually retain what happened. They've experienced it, so they know it, but they don't know it in the sense that they can actually give you an example of it happening, because it's not actually necessary for them to know. And that's how NI works. It's stop getting bogged down in the details, right? You have to look at it from the bird's eye perspective. Anyway, extroverted sensing is the other action function, like extroverted intuition. And people who use those functions are often confused because they can both seem very hyper, and they can both seem focused on, intuitive topics sometimes. But the thing about extroverted sensing is it's the function that actually gives you the follow through to do shit. It's not necessarily doing things itself, but it's the function that really gets you to do things when it's high up in your cognitive profile. Because my extroverted sensing is in the polar position, it's really hard for me to even do something like make this video, so I have to just get up and start walking and listen to music and smoke weed or whatever I gotta do, and then eventually I'll be like, okay, I'll start making it, right? High up extroverted sensing, as soon as they decide they want to do something, they do it. And they have no absolute problem at all with kind of switching directions while they're already doing something and doing something else. Just like extroverted intuition in a way, except extroverted intuition only has to ideate, really. There's no inherent need to, right, directly engage with people or directly grapple with the world all the time. For them, it's like, well, I was thinking about this, but now I'm thinking about that. This would be cool, but that's cool too. Right? Extroverted sensing is actually doing shit and being like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to do something else. Right? They're gathering up experiences as fast as they possibly can, analyzing them in hindsight with their introverted judging function. And then it all filters down to their introverted intuition, and eventually they'll just know how stuff works and they won't make stupid decisions anymore. Yes, you see SE users being reckless. It's just the way their minds work. You can't fault them for it. Right? If they're not a little reckless, they're never going to learn anything. By the way, I love you guys. STPs, SFPs. Shout out. You drag me to parties and shit. That too. You get people to have fun experiences. Introverted feeling. Another function that seems to be totally misunderstood because it's really, really hard to understand, especially for a type like me or Eric, but I think maybe I understand it a little better than he does. Introverted feeling is the thing that really lets you know someone's genuine emotional state. The thing is extroverted feeling often analyzes people at a very surface level based on, things like the look on someone's face, right? Oh, he has an angry look on his face, he must be angry. That sort of deal. Introverted feeling is much more subtle than that. It's much more penetrating than that. It's like, you know what? Like, he's smiling a little bit, but it's kind of a pained smile, like he's trying to be happy, but he's not really happy. And I think he might actually be really depressed because his girlfriend left him a month ago or something like that. FI is aware of all of these little factors that go into the human experience and affect someone's emotions and in turn, affect the dynamic around them. FI dominant people are the ones who are going to be, kind-hearted souls genuinely care about other people when nobody else will. Right? Because they are so aware, right? So conscious of the, the pain and the suffering and the joy and everything else that goes along with being a human being. And I guess as I get more comfortable with my introverted feeling, and especially using it to interact with people, it really helps you kind of smooth out all the edges. It helps you be like, you know what, this isn't working. Let's just change tack. Like, obviously this is for another time or another place, or I need a different approach. It helps you know what the right thing really is to say to someone on a grander level than just accomplishing a goal or getting something you want from them. Right? It's the right thing to say in order to basically fix the bug that's currently happening in the human experience in front of you. And then in that sense, it's troubleshooting like TI is. And honestly, remember, FI users are thinking every bit as much as TI users. They're just thinking in a totally different way and maybe about totally different things. But they're still trying to figure out, right, what the truth is and, what they can do to bring it to others. I think I'll stop it there. It's been about a half an hour. Give me your questions and your comments and your concerns, and maybe I'll make a future video that addresses some of those. Thanks, guys.